Welcome back, everyone. I hope you enjoyed the networking session. Thank you all so much for participating. Our next session is Hands Off, Choosing the Right Touchless Tech in the Era of COVID. Touchless technology has long been lauded as the future of interactive tech, but this prediction seems more and more prescient in these tough times. In this sessions, representatives from PushStart Creative will give an overview of 4 promising touchless technologies, followed by a case study exploring the implications of integrating each technology into a high-traffic, public, and traditionally touch-controlled product, a treadmill. I would like to now introduce our speakers, Adrian Taylor, Creative Director and co-founder at PushStart Creative, and David Lucas, Industrial Designer at PushStart Creative. Thank you.
How's it going?
Good morning. Good morning. Nice to join everyone virtually. It's a little strange not to be in the room, but happy to share a little of the touchless work we've been doing and some of the thinking around how to adapt to this changing world. We go ahead and bring up those slides. Fantastic. So we'll keep the intro short today and try to save the meat of the discussion for the case study. So just a little background, David and I work at a studio here in Austin called PushStart Creative. We're about almost a decade old now, and we've been focusing on the intersection of physical and digital products, what may be commonly referred to now as IoT. Let's go ahead and keep cruising through these slides, David. So why touchless tech, right? And James sort of queued this up, but the reality is that our built environment is, heavily intertwined with interactive moments, points at which we need to give input to, machines and architecture and communicate with the physical and technological world. And our hands are incredibly nimble and useful tools, and for decades, centuries, they've been the right input methodology for the majority of tech that we interact with. But before COVID, a lot of trends were on the rise to move away from such a sort of mouse, keyboard, button press centric modality of interacting with technology to things like voice and gesture and eye tracking and all these exciting new technologies. But to date, they sort of struggled to find their home. They're sort of creeping into our lives, but it's a lot of 1 step forward, 2 steps back kind of territory. Let's keep cruising. So just to add a little bit more about us and maybe why our opinion on this even matters. This has been a space of a lot of focus and interest to us over the years. We've been thinking a lot about, as I mentioned before, that sort of intersection of digital and physical products. And what happens in that intersection is you often have to, find a way to control and interact with objects beyond just poking at them. So that is commonly manifests in companion apps and remote control experiences. We all probably have some smart home appliances that we manage through our phones or through a browser. But that's grown a lot, and our experience has been focused a lot in things like food service and vending and appliances and these sort of high touch environments that haven't typically played host to technology and are now trying to find their way through that. We do a lot of prototyping in-house, and that actually sort of helps us learn about these experiences, these new emerging experiences, and gives us a better understanding of sort of what feels right, what makes sense, and a lot of the lessons that we're going to talk through today, even though this case study is a bit abstracted from some of our day-to-day work to sort of avoid stepping on NDAs, it's all sort of based on our real-world product development experiences. Let's keep cruising. So today's agenda, we're going to basically talk through a day in the life of a treadmill in the time of COVID. So this is, we wanted to find something to base a little case study around so we could start to pull together all this disparate experience on touchless and bring it into one narrative that would sort of make sense and be exemplary of some of the considerations that are important when choosing which touchless tech makes sense to enable your product in this environment. So Treadmill sort of stood out for us as a great example because it's a communal device. It's a shared device. It's a device that's in sort of a high sensitive area, lots of touch, sweat, heavy breathing. It's typically been controlled by, hand-based inputs. It's in a shared space. So, it's a device that needs to be durable, work over time. And so it sort of became a good representative piece of equipment to sort of think about some different strategies for how you might enable a user experience that makes sense in that environment. So I'm going to leave it there and let David pick up the ball.
Awesome. Thanks, Adrian. So yeah, as Adrian mentioned, we're using the Treadmill as our platform for this touchless exploration. And we chose it for three main reasons. The first is that treadmills live in this high-risk environment. It's public, it's indoor, and it's high traffic. So there's a lot of opportunities for transmission. The second is that the treadmill itself requires this combination of digital touch controls and analog touch controls. And then that third reason is that gyms serve as a communal function critical to our kind of physical and mental well-being. So it's really important that people get back exercising in gyms as quickly as possible. So we need to find these innovative solutions for the problems that COVID has created. And so using the treadmill exists within this broader journey of going to the gym. And typically when we're doing projects like this, we look at every step along this journey. And then for every step, we look for pain points and then opportunities for improvement and innovation. But for the sake of this conversation, we'll be really zeroed in on that onboarding phase and the actual running phase. So the first touchless enabler we're going to talk about are companion apps, which are really familiar. It's a super established method for enabling touchless controls. When we're thinking about controlling a Bluetooth speaker through an app or smart home devices or using Google Pay at a terminal. These are all ways that the phone is used so that we don't actually have to touch the physical product. So it's a touchless enabler we're all really used to. And there's a bunch of embedded tech enablers within the phone that can be leveraged, talking screens and light sensors and haptics and NFC. But controlling a device remotely with our phone can be pretty difficult. It can introduce some hurdles, but it also introduces some really unique opportunities. So let's look at, well, one more slide of getting connected. Before we can even start controlling the device remotely, we need to get the phone connected to the product. And we think of that as a handshake. And there's a lot of different ways that you can do this handshake, connecting the device to the actual product. That can be through Bluetooth or RFID or NFC. There's a multitude of ways depending on the experience that you want to provide to your consumer. And then there's also the question of connectivity. Is the device connecting to a cloud-based service first and then to the product and back? Or is this a local connection like Bluetooth where the device is directly speaking with the product? So here is a snapshot of the case study we're talking about with the treadmill. On the left here, on the top, you're seeing an onboarding process using a QR code. So this is becoming more and more familiar, especially in restaurants now, where we're taking pictures of the menu with our phones in order to order. In this case, you would be taking a picture of the QR to start your run and bring the controls onto your device. And in the lower image there, for the actual controlling of incline and speed, you'd be using your phone and not touching the treadmill at all. So there's a lot of pros here. This is primarily a software-based solution, so you don't have to make a lot of modifications to the actual product. That can be really expensive. The technology is really established. Consumers are extremely familiar with it. You can update, send updates to, well, you can update the QR code and make modifications to the controls So it's very flexible. And then you get all these opportunities for new features that can offer opportunities to personalize and customize. We're talking about saved workouts, sharing workouts with friends, monitoring with trainers. But there's also some cons here. The ergonomics are a little substandard. Even when you're on a treadmill, it's great to be looking forward. There's limited legibility. It's hard to see the phone from that far away. And then there's some interplay issues with using other apps while you're also controlling the treadmill. So our second touchless.
So David, can I jump in real quick to just dovetail on that? So I think as we go through these, I'll just steal the punchline is there's no right answer, right? The idea is to find the appropriate balance for your users, for your environment, for their context, and we'll talk a little bit about how you balance that decision. But in each case, what we want to be looking at is what is going to potentially add value, not just fix a problem. And so when we sort of start thinking about how to navigate a post-COVID world, and we start thinking about how to interact with pieces of hardware technology that haven't historically supported any sort of non-touch interface, it's not about just translating. It's not about just saying, okay, well, we can create this app that looks like a remote control of what used to be on the screen of the treadmill, and we're done. That doesn't always work. It doesn't always translate one for one. More importantly, I think we want to be looking really closely at those opportunities. So, okay, if we are going to ask somebody to take on the burden of potentially having an app for their gym to use the treadmill, what benefits can we give them? How can we make that a value add instead of, a value minus, right? And that's where things like scheduling your time on the treadmill, or saving your favorite set of inclines and declines and speeds, or working with your trainer, some of those sort of net new opportunities that emerge from initially just trying to solve the touchless problem are maybe the most exciting part of what's happening. Disruption, we look at a lot of the negatives, and there are unfortunately a lot of negatives right now, but we also need to look for the opportunities and if not the positives, the ways we can at least expand our thinking and open ourselves to new ways of engaging with these technologies. So there's my pep talk. I'll turn it back over to you, Dave. David, I think you're still muted.
Thank you. So our second enabler here is voice recognition. And users have become a lot more familiar with this as a tool. With Siri and Alexa, there's a complex host of technologies that go into voice control. But if you can pull it off, it's a really natural, invisible, and touchless experience. And so in our example, we're looking at the runner connecting to the treadmill via Bluetooth on their smartwatch. And then at the bottom there, they're controlling the treadmill with their voice. And so kind of hitting on what Adrian was saying, this is really cool in a vacuum. Being able to control a treadmill with just your voice is really great. But from a usability standpoint, we're talking about a gym environment, so there's lots of ambient noise, and the user themselves is creating ambient noise. When I'm running, I'm breathing really hard, and that can be misinterpreted as a voice command. And you kind of need this wealth of verbal commands and knowledge of them, and to be able to control the treadmill. And then you're kind of relying on the consumer to have this piece of compatible hardware, which is the headset. That being said, although the experience is really great, it might not be the right tech for this particular environment. And just because you can pull it off, it doesn't mean that you should pull it off. Our third enabler here is infrared, and coupled with the holographic display. And we really wanted to think here about how you could pull off a mid-air touch control. So you're really not touching any device. Public restrooms have had this for a while. You use the faucets, there's an IR sensor at the bottom. It's basically detecting when there's an object in front of its field of light, and then it's a binary control, either on or off. So with the display that we built, the touchless display that we built in the upper right, it has this NeoNode touch sensor in there. But you can couple that with a display that's horizontal and an Osaka 3D projection plate, and you're able to create in the bottom right there a holographic display that floats in midair. And so on the left-hand side here, we're looking at almost a traditional treadmill display, but projected into the air with very basic controls. And so here you're getting this pro of having a really visually impactful product, and for marketing purposes, that could be really great. And you don't need the user to have any app or any device, and there's no setup or pairing time. So it's really accessible. And even the controls are relatively similar to the controls of a treadmill, especially in just where they're placed. But obviously there's some huge cons here. There's costly changes to the actual product design of the treadmill, if not a total redesign, so it's really expensive. And then that novelty, although it's maybe a high impact for marketing, could be a barrier to access for people actually using the treadmill. It could serve as a negative depending on what the audience is. And there's kind of limited functionality. It's tricky to get really precise control with IR. And then again, the display clarity depends on the environment. Gyms typically have a lot of really bright lighting that would maybe dim out the display in this case. And then our last enabler that we're going to talk about is spatial computing. And this is kind of a really broad category. It's not one thing, but in general, spatial computing is trying to map the world that exists around it and then locate and identify the user within that world. And so that's using a host of tech enablers, depth cameras, artificial intelligence, infrared, motion tracking. But we've seen some of the most compelling experiences derived from spatial computing. Amazon does a really great job with its Amazon Go stores and user recognition through Palm. Leap Motion has some really amazing mid-air touch control or non-touch control, gesture controls, and gesture mirroring. And just this last couple weeks, Oculus came out with a new standalone VR set, which can understand the user in space without having to have external cameras looking in at the user. So this is all really about creating really immersive experiences. And so we did a bunch of snapshots of what this sensor array could potentially unlock. We're talking about facial recognition, being able to walk up to a treadmill and have it understand you. That's really cool, not just from unlocking the treadmill, but there's also a user profile involved. So treadmill is going to understand your past workouts, and it's going to be able to make personalized recommendations to you. It's a hyper personalized experience. And then you can have more fine-tuned gesture control. So in the upper middle and the upper right, we're looking at really fine detail and adjusting the incline, or maybe doing some sort of gimmicky but fun gestures for starting a run or ending the run. In the upper right, maybe shooting a gun to start. In the lower right, you're putting up your hands like Rocky to finish it out. And in the lower left there, we're just thinking about how depth cameras and proximity sensing could give you this really intuitive running experience where just the fact that you're speeding up or slowing down causes the treadmill to automatically adjust to your speed. So this is another level of understanding that the machine has about the user that offers this really immersive experience. And so pros, you get that it's completely touchless. You have all these novel experiences that are just great opportunities for innovation, hyper-personalization, and all types of control. But then there's the obvious cons. It's super costly to implement, develop, and test. There's extremely high learning curve for anyone with low tech literacy. And then there's the ever-present privacy concern, which could also be an issue. And that is it for our case studies. I'll pass the mic back to Adrian for kind of wrap up here.
Thanks, David. So obviously, sort of a very quick pass. There's a lot of depth and due diligence that would be done to really take any one of these concepts to the next level. I will also mention we have a Medium article that sort of goes over this content if you're curious to dig a little bit deeper. And before I sum up, I'll also mention that if you guys have any questions or want to talk about these topics in more detail, you can add that to the comments, and I think they'll let us know. But anyway, so throw your questions in there, and while you're doing that, I'll talk a little bit about sort of, stepping back, zooming back out. And like I sort of alluded to early on, I think, there's two major takeaways in our minds from this. One is about sort of technology and experience matching. And so the idea is taking all of the considerations at play about product development. So user needs, user benefits, user context, the specific product and the company that makes that product and their rights to win and the things they're good at and the things they're bad at, cost structures and, profit requirements and serviceability. And, you take this whole context of requirements, some software and some hardware, and you start to find a path towards what makes sense. So that's kind of one lens to put on understanding the appropriate touchless technology for a given application. But the other is, what are the unlocks? What are the opportunities? If all we've done is make a new light switch, is it worth it? Is it worth all the investment? Is it worth the user having to learn a new pattern and a behavior? What can we bring that provides added value, makes that experience even more compelling? So if you look at that last example where we're talking about, depth cameras, and we're talking about, getting to run harder and faster towards the treadmill as it picks up speed to match you, getting to throw your arms up as you run through the finish line, getting to basically have an experience that's pretty transformative from the current modality of punching buttons. What does that unlock? That becomes really interesting. Obviously, investment level is very high, but reward could be very high. And that's what we're always balancing in product design, right? Is trying to figure out how we balance, the cost centers, whether they be development cost, tooling cost, cost of goods, against sort of the experiential wins we're going to bring to the consumer at the end of the day. So I think we can kind of leave it there. If there's, like I said, if there's any questions, anything we can kind of, I know there's a very sort of surface level overview in many ways, but if there's any questions we can answer, any, if anyone has an example of something they're working on that we want to spitball for a minute, or anybody has an alternative touchless tech that they're really excited about, let us know. I'll just kind of pause for a minute to see if anyone wants to contribute anything in the comments before we wrap it up. Very quiet out there. Anyway, very much appreciate everyone's time today. We're a very open studio. If you're interested to talk more about Touchless Tech or anything else we've sort of touched on today, please feel free to reach out at info@pushstartcreative.com. You can visit our website as well. And as I mentioned, if you find us on Medium, that'll get you to the original blog post or original Medium post we did about this topic that sort of inspired today's talk. David, anything to add before we head out?
I just want to say thanks to Austin Startup Week for having us, and it's been a great opportunity to present some of our work to you guys.
Yeah, crazy times. It's awesome that you guys have found a way to do this virtually, and yeah, thanks everybody for your time today.
Looks like there's a question.
All you got to do is say it's over, and then people. How do you think Touchless Tech is going to grow in 2021? It's a little bit unpredictable at this point. I think you're seeing both a lot of investment. I mean, we follow sort of the self-serve, I'll call it self-serve food industry, which is a pretty broad variety of equipment pretty closely. And it's interesting to see how fast people are responding in that space. I mean, even pretty mid-market water cooler manufacturers are, adding foot pedals to allow for dispensing without touch. I think there was so much sort of in the works already that wasn't necessarily as focused on concerns around hygiene and contamination. That was just about sort of convenience and human to computer interface. Obviously voice is on the rise, gesture-based stuff is starting to grow. So I think, whether wearable support and interoperability between devices. So I think the trends and the foundational technologies were already so on the rise that this just becomes a bit of catalyst to sort of get things moving, just in the way that the everything on demand and delivery everything industry has, snapped to in the past, 5 months. I think we're going to see more touchless experiences in 2021 for sure. Just as a sort of anecdotal note, NeoNode, that technology enabler that we mentioned that builds these, IR strips that allow for some of these kind of float touch interfaces. We've been aware of them for many years, but when we were like, hey, we should go build a quick demo of this, they were like nearly sold out and basically having big supply chain issues because there's so much interest and demand. So I think that folks are focusing on it and trying to find a solve. That being said, as normalcy starts to resume, you could see those efforts, diminish a bit. I don't know if you have any other crystal ball to add to that, David.
No, I would just say that it's been kind of nice in doing these explorations because people are so open to new things right now because all of our hands have been kind of forced by COVID. So it's kind of a cool time to strike and get through some things that maybe wouldn't be palatable at another time.
And another question is, what are some of the biggest challenges when dealing with touchless tech? I'll just speak from my experience, and David, if you have other thoughts, please chime in. But in my experience, a lot of these technologies are still somewhat novel in our day-to-day lives. We don't use a lot of gesture-based stuff yet. The way we use voice is pretty narrow right now. So when you start to try as a product designer to envision these experiences, you spend a lot of time in your brain sort of imagining what something might be like. And so I guess I would encourage folks to try to get into some kind of prototype as quickly as possible, because you can waste a lot of time if you're basing your touchless tech solve on an assumption that something will be easy, or that the scale of a gesture needs to be this big when it really needs to be this big. So I think it's very easy, since this stuff isn't that common yet in our day-to-day experiences, to just to bake some assumptions in that sort of can be really detrimental to the concept later. So, we love any kind of prototype, low fidelity, high fidelity, paper prototypes, Wizard of Oz stuff where, you get somebody to put a camera. So you want to do gesture-based stuff, right? Well, programming a depth camera and all that's actually quite a bit of work, right? So how about you put a camera and you have somebody act as the artificial intelligence behind the curtain. They watch the gestures, they try to make meaning of it, and then they give the feedback to the user. How does it work? Is it hard to use? Is it easy to use? How nuanced are the gestures? So I think there's always ways to kind of quickly prototype, but that would be the guidance I'd give, is get out of your head and into the world as quickly as possible.
Yeah, and this is really nitty gritty, but in terms of challenges, my coworker Kwame and I were playing around with that touchless display yesterday, and I realized you're just pointing and using a calculator, And it's kind of cool because your finger is floating and you're pressing buttons and they're lighting up. But there's some level of feedback that you're not getting, and it really takes away from the experience. And I think there's got to be some way that the product is communicating with the user about the state that it's in and how it's being controlled in a way that's maybe more than just something happening on screen. I don't know how to solve that, or if there's some kind of haptics in play, but the feedback was a little bit challenging.
Yeah, air haptics, that's our new technology. Yeah, I mean, this sort of dovetails into another question about what do we wish we had known when we got involved with touchless technologies. And I think for us, we've been working with this concept of a multi-device scenario, which typically manifests as a web app or a mobile app, something in which you're giving inputs and controlling a device that you are not physically interacting with. And one of the things that has been true in our experiences since the beginning of that, and remains true with a lot of products I see today, is just the room for sort of dissidence to emerge, right? The room for confusion to emerge. So when, historically, if you wanted to control a device, you walked up to it, it's got input and output. It's got lights and buttons or a screen or whatever, but it's very direct and you have this very closed loop sense of feedback. When you're looking at your phone and you're controlling your AC unit, I mean, how many times you go, wait, why is it doing this? This is not what I asked for it to do, right? And so that, as the systems become more complicated, as you get into multiple users within a single ecosystem controlling a device, or now we've got touch and gesture and voice, and let's hook up Alexa so she can also control it, and I have TTT, and as the ecosystems become increasingly more complicated, expressing state really clearly, and I think this is sort of what David was hinting at, expressing state is really critical, right? I need to be able to grok whether I'm looking at the device or at my phone, or hearing feedback in my ear. I need to be able to grok very quickly what the state of the device is, and maybe more importantly, why it's in that state. Since I didn't directly press the button now, why is it doing that is the big question of the sort of, distributed device world. So a bit of a ramble, but hopefully that's some food for thought. And I think that's about all the questions. Thank you guys so much for chipping in a few questions. I really do appreciate it. I guess we'll turn it back over to James.
Yeah, thank you, Adrian and David, for that fascinating presentation. I really appreciated the manner with which you handled the case study. It is really interesting to see how different aspects of tech can be integrated into one touchless system. From showing the entire customer journey of a treadmill user, considering the plausible issues a more traditional treadmill system might face in COVID, and showcasing the capabilities that different types of touchless enablers have for handling these common pain points, we were able to get a nice high-level view of how such innovative solutions are developed and implemented. Thank you both so much for volunteering your time and walking us through these considerations. We will now break until our next session at 11:45. So I will see y'all there.